All right. Welcome, everybody, to Beats, Beds, and Browns season 7. My name is Joe Skibby, and tonight we're pleased to be interviewing Whiskey Nick from Acres Distillery, one of the Midwest standout grain-to-glass distilleries, actually growing many of the grains used in their spirits directly on family farmland. Built on generations of Illinois farming knowledge, Whiskey Acres blends agricultural heritage with modern craft distilling to produce bourbon, rye, bottled and bond whiskey, vodka, and other small batch spirits rooted in the region's terroir. Their operation represents a full circle approach to farming and flavor, from planting and harvesting to fermenting, distilling, barreling, and bottling, all while helping redefine what Midwest craft whiskey can be. Whiskey Acres has become known not only for award-winning spirits, but also for connecting consumers back to the land, the grain, and the people behind the bottle. Nick Nagel, one of the co-founders of Whiskey Acres, serves as a distiller, farmer, and public-facing voice for the brand. He comes from a fifth-generation farming background and helped build Whiskey Acres alongside Jim and Jamie Walter to create one of Illinois' first true estate distilleries. He's especially known for pushing the seed to spirit philosophy, treating whiskey more like a vineyard-driven wine operation where grain variety, soil, and farming practices directly influence flavor. So grab your favorite pour, settle in, and let's get into it with Whiskey Acres. Our first question for Nick, as always, where you been, where you at, and where you going? Let's see, we got you muted. Let's see, add stage. It's saying I can't unmute you. There we go.
You know, we practiced this before. I didn't hit the mute button either, you know.
I think bringing you in sometimes will auto mute. So that's my fault for not giving you the heads up. I apologize. Let's do that again. Everybody, welcome Nick. All right. So as we ask our artists, our farmers, and our distillers, the same question: where you been, where you at, and where you going?
All right. Where I've been in the last month, I've been in Chicago. I've been in a tractor. I've been at the Capitol in Springfield, and I've been at the beautiful visitor center at Whiskey Acres, welcoming hundreds of thousands of guests through our front door. Where am I at? Sitting in a quiet house while my daughter is at dance and my son is at basketball, and I have no idea where my wife is, and where I'm going as it relates to the distillery. I am on this incredible journey with Jim, Jamie, and the entire Whiskey Acres team of seeing this vision that we put together, you know, almost 15 years ago, coming to life and being validated through, you know, consumers' palates.
It flies when you're having fun, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For folks new to Whiskey Acres, can you give us the origin story behind the distillery and how you guys got started?
Yeah. And your intro was like 98% accurate. The one thing that I always like to flag is that we grow everything on the farm that we use for distilling. There is no grain that we don't grow that we eventually distill. And so, you know, that gets directly into some history. So Jim and Jamie Walter are my two business partners. They own and operate a farm in DeKalb, Illinois. That is, it was started by Jim's father in the 30s. That family originated from Portsmouth, Ohio, prior to that. So if you kind of look at the genealogy of farmers, that makes Jim a fourth generation farmer and Jamie a fifth generation farmer. Jim went to the University of Illinois, got a degree basically in agriculture engineering. His son Jamie went to the University of Illinois, got a degree in advertising, actually got a degree in law from Drake, and was a practicing attorney for a while, as well as did some slightly more than hobby production of Cabernets out of Napa Valley with his wife and another couple, and just has this incredible and never-ending entrepreneurial spirit. And then personally, I'm a proud fifth generation farmer from my family's farm down in Sheldon, Illinois, which is about 100 miles straight south of Chicago. We've been farming there since the 1860s. Also went to the University of Illinois, got a degree in ag communications, and spent, sort of the post-college time before Whiskey Acres, focusing a lot of my career on ag education. Quite literally traveling the country, teaching people about the farm to table process. Did some corporate communications and some sort of district sales things. And it was actually in that district sales positions where I met Jim and Jamie. And to make a very, very long story short, because I think we only got like 45 minutes here, really Whiskey Acres, the origin story is 3 farmers, and full disclosure, this was Jamie's original idea, but he came to Jim and me with the idea to execute. But 3 farmers looking to do something with commodity grain to make it no longer a commodity. And so, that idea was essentially spawned by some state laws in Illinois changing as it relates to craft distillers. And, they expanded the production limits and really made what was a very expensive hobby into, on paper, what could be a very viable business. And so for us, our go-to-market was, we are farmers first. We won't source anything, whether it be grain or distillate, and we were going to do it the right way from the beginning. And so that's where we are today.
It's an amazing story. You've got legal, you've got corporate sales, you've got vintners, and a bunch of farmers true to form, trying to find value in their crop and maximize revenue from that. So love the history and how you guys tie into it. How important is Illinois soil and climate to the flavor profile of the spirits that you distill?
I don't want to oversell it, but what I would say here is the Illinois soil is absolutely integral in allowing us to have a consistently high quality grain to utilize in the distillery. So, the farm itself in DeKalb is about 2,000 acres. Depending on your perspective, that's a giant farm or it's a small farm. We have neighbors who farm 40,000 acres. We have neighbors who farm 100 acres and HOA farmers like I'm talking to right now, so, but what's important is that we actually only need about 10% of what we grow to operate the distillery. And that's across in Northern Illinois, about 20 miles from north to south of where those acres are. And virtually every one of those acres, most folks would consider to be class 1 farmland. And so rarely do we have to deal with the conversation of, are we going to have a crop this year because of a drought? We've got just wonderful, nutrient density and capacity in the soil. The land itself is well tiled and drained and things like that, so that ultimately gets us great grain quality to use in the distillery. I don't want to overstate the phrase terroir yet, because we have a hunch that it matters. We just haven't quite proven it yet. But we have soil maps of every acre that we farm. Those soil maps actually are overlaid with planting maps of varietals of corn or whatever crop that we're growing, that then get turned into yield maps. And then we are in the process of essentially extrapolating that data over some various years to see if we can make some definitive decisions on terroir.
Is that a manual process, the mapping and tracking? Or I know that's a kind of an ignorant question, but you get into a combine nowadays and it's GPS and Wi-Fi and satellite driven.
So it goes from one extreme to the other. I was actually talking to an old timer farmer the other day about how soil maps were done, 80 years ago, and how they could possibly be accurate. And he told me the way they were done was basically ag teachers took students out with shovels and did a grid, and they dug into the soil and found out exactly what it was, and wrote the maps that we all utilize today. Fast forward to your point, we're driving machinery over that's steered by GPS down to a sub-inch accuracy, and each one of those seeds that we plant is geolocated. We have a map of every seed that's planted. We then have, over the growing season, we have satellites that fly over that give us imagery of plant health and things like that are going on in the field. And then at harvest, we have, again, down to the micro ranch, yield map for what we grew, and then can then make decisions on what we should repeat, what we should fix, and what all those types of things. So it's a fun sort of dichotomy of where it started and what we're doing today in terms of technology and the labor that goes into it or doesn't go into it now.
Yeah, so many innovations in science and engineering originated in the farm, and much thanks to the people that grow our food on a day-to-day basis, make sure the shelves are stocked. You mentioned that everything that you're growing, everything that goes into Whiskey Acres is grown on your farms. What is the varietal of grains you're currently growing?
So just from a types of grain, we grow corn, wheat, rye, and barley. And we basically don't experiment with wheat, rye, and barley. We found those genetics that we like, and year in and year out utilize those same genetics. That's a variable that we don't want to insert in our production. However, on the corn side of things, we're essentially mad scientists of corn genetics as it relates to the distilling world. So what that means is, as an average consumer, when you drive by a cornfield, basically one field looks the same as the next. To the farmer's eye, you will notice things like plant height, silk color, tassel color, things like that you can notice just from the road. And then when you get into the field, you'll notice root structure and kernel color and cob color and all those kind of things. And those all reflect variance in between yellow dent corn genetics. And so over the years, through sort of the relationship that happens between the farm and the distillery, we have narrowed down to 3 very specific yellow dent varietals that we use annually for our baseline bourbon. And fortunately, like that makes really great whiskey, and allows us to be very consistent from a production standpoint. But it's not like that sexy or of an exciting story to tell to the consumer. So to sort of evolve from that, in addition to those baseline genetics, we have utilized things like blue popcorn, bloody butcher corn. We recently released a bourbon called Oaxacan green corn. It's this beautiful dark green corn that the genetics originated in Oaxaca. And so what we do with that, we call our artisan series, is we follow our standard mash bill in terms of ratios and proportions, fermentation process, yeast type, distillation methods. The singular variable that we insert into it is the type of corn that we use, so that we can showcase that this corn makes a flavor profile along these lines and that corn makes something different. Just like if you're growing grapes, it's common knowledge that a Cabernet grape is going to make something different than a Merlot grape. They're going to look pretty similar to the untrained eye, but when it makes it to the glass, you know that you have something different there. So that's kind of the highlight reel of what's been put in a bottle, and I'll give you a little sneak peek of what's going to be put in the bottle. So we're constantly looking for ways to differentiate the distillery and the product line that we have, and all those things that I listed to you. If Joe, if you decided you wanted to open up a scaled distillery on a farm tomorrow, you could go shopping for those corn genetics at the same place that we could. Wait 7 years. There's a lot that goes into it, but plant it, distill it, and wait a long time to actually be able to bottle it. And the next thing you know, we've got somebody doing the same thing that we are. So what we've gone so far, just from like creating a moat around the product line standpoint, but even more importantly, being able to just create something that's very special. We have bred our own proprietary genetics for distilling. We found an open pollinated yellow corn that was used for distillation during Prohibition in Minnesota. That's got a little bit of a whiskey pedigree behind it. And we cross-pollinated that with an open pollinated red flint corn that we sourced from Tuscany, Italy. And that particular corn is primarily used for polenta because it's so flavorful. And so, for the listeners here, if you want a quick corn anatomy lesson, the process for this is, if you look at a corn plant, the top of the plant, I always call it Sideshow Bob's haircut, the tassel. That's where the pollen comes from. That's the male portion of the plant. That pollen falls down into the husk or onto the husk, and coming out of that husk are silks. That's the female portion of the plant. When corn comes in contact with that silk, if you follow it down, there's a corresponding kernel that's produced. In the event that you're eating sweet corn, you husk an ear back and you still have silks attached to it. That means it was not pollinated. So as it relates to this project, what we did was we planted these two varietals next to each other. We detasseled, so we essentially took the male portion off of the yellow corn, and then allowed Mother Nature to do her work, and the pollen from the red corn cross-pollinated with the yellow corn to create a first generation hybrid that, quite frankly, makes some of the best whiskey we've ever tasted, both off the still, and we're getting close to 4 years in barrel, and so that's been a lot of fun, and that's a lot of excitement, coming for us, and being able to bring something truly novel to the marketplace.
Yeah, my mouth's watering just hearing about that. And being someone who's planted corn on a small scale, if you don't plant the corn densely enough, then it won't pollinate, because it's wind pollinated. Is that right?
Depends on what you're trying to do. Actually, historically, corn is self-pollinated. So,
Okay.
so
Just
what happens?
dropping.
Yeah, that pollen falls down from the tassel onto the silks. And actually, if you look back historically, one of the major innovations in modern farming was somebody discovering and essentially teaching and showcasing hybridization. So instead of, my grandfather would have, or my great grandfather would have been planting genetics that were just, it was all done by hand. They'd see a big ear of corn in the field. Well, this looks good. I'm going to keep this seed for next year, and then plant it the following season. That's very different. When you're doing that, you're planting the seed, and the crop are the same thing. When you're dealing with hybridization, the output is the seed that you want to plant. So it's just a very different way of thinking about crop versus seed. And bottom line for us is going to make some incredible whiskey. It is.
I think you just answered 3 of my next questions, yeah. Right? A specific crop that surprised you once it hit the barrel aging process, the relationship between good farming and good whiskey. So this is phenomenal. I love the science behind it and the customization, because it is still possible to find some original flavor profiles, and we're glad that you're doing the work that you do. So thank you.
I can add to one of your questions, and the surprise you out of the barrel question. In addition to many of the things I told you about, we make an incredible bottled and bond rye whiskey. And so again, I'll give you a kind of a fun farmer tangent here. In the United States in general, and in Illinois very specifically, there is very little, or if any, rye actually grown to be taken to harvest. Almost all rye is planted as a cover crop. And because of that, essentially capitalism comes into play. There's no financial reason for seed companies to develop genetics that are focused on grain quality and producing, high quality plants, because you plant the cover crop in the fall, it comes to life in this, it goes dormant, comes back to life in the spring, and then it gets tilled back into the soil, and you never take it to grain. And so because of that, the genetics we have access to are what we refer to as NVS, so non-variety specific genetics. What that means, it's the equivalent of going to Menards and buying bulk grass seed. You're getting grass, but you don't really know, what it's good at growing in. So one thing I didn't mention, I mentioned the founding members of our team, but a very important person that was also part of the beginning times with us is a guy named Dave Pickerell. Dave used to be the master distiller at Maker's Mark. He left Maker's in the mid to late 2000s I often like to laugh to say, he helped knuckleheads like us transition from aspirational to functional distiller. And among the many things he did, one was talked us into growing rye, and helped us to source some very specific genetics. And I'll give a shout out to a friend of ours named Mike Swanson. He's the owner and runs a distillery up in Halleck, Minnesota called Far North. All those things that I told you we're doing with corn, he's doing with rye. And he actually sourced a very specific varietal of rye seed for us from Canada, where rye is a cash crop. And there is a seed catalog that you can shop in and look for different variables of why and how it grows. And we picked this particular varietal because of its agronomic factors. It doesn't grow very tall. It's got a good stalk. Because the challenge with growing the rye that we have access to in Illinois, we talked about our great soil here. That soil is meant to grow corn and soybeans, not meant to grow rye. And what happens is that rye gets in this dense and nutrient-rich soil, and it just grows and it grows and it grows. And we get one of our famous Illinois spring, summer thunderstorms, half inch to an inch rain with a 30-mile-an-hour wind, and then it just acts like a bulldozer and knocks that stuff over. These particular rye genetics can withstand that to a certain degree. So instead of being able to harvest 20% of the field, we can harvest 80% of the field. So a long way of getting around to what I'm trying to get to is that the bonus in choosing these rye genetics is that they have a very, very big and starchy kernel, which gives us lots of sugar, which then gives us lots of residual sugar post-fermentation, so that when distilled, we have this wonderful, almost sweet vanilla forward rye whiskey that is very atypical of, compared to that spicy dill forward, rye that the industry is known for. Three of us, generally speaking, didn't like rye whiskey until we made our own. And now we're at a place, we like it now, but we love ours.
Absolutely. I love the backstory behind it all. As a marketing guy, you get these contract distillers and other folks just slapping their name on a bottle, telling a story that may or may not be true. It's good to hear the science and tech that goes into the bottle. How does sustainability show up in your operation on a day-to-day basis?
We live and breathe it probably like no other distillery in the planet. And so several things play into it. One is just, if you think about the carbon footprint of the grain going to the distillery, in most cases, the corn that we're using for the distillery is somewhere between a 9 iron and a driver away from the production facility. So, that's not that big of a factor, but it's literally connected to the property in many cases. So we check that box really, really hard. Our entire operation is solar powered and has been since 2018. So we've got about 87 kilowatts of solar panels on the distillery site that are large enough on an annual basis. They power the farm, the house on the farm, the visitor center, the tasting room, and all of those things. And the surprising one that we hadn't initially planned on, and is related to why we have solar. Again, I'll go back to Dave Pickerel. The farm itself was established in the 1930s, where, as Jamie would call him, great grandpa dug the original well. And that well was not dug intending for great grandson to have a commercially scaled distillery on it. So the water output wasn't necessarily there for us to be able to utilize the way we need to use water for distilling. And so we were beginning to make plans for digging a new, deeper well to give us, infinite supply of water. And Dave said, hit the brakes really quick. I want to see what water you guys have here before we do anything or mess anything up. So we sent water samples off, and we get the results back. And I don't know if you ever met Dave or know of him, but he's passed away. So, rest in peace, Dave. But he was a linebacker at West Point. And after that, spent his life in the whiskey business. And so, he was kind of this larger than life, 6'4", 6'5", just a huge dude, but just a puppy dog at the same time. And I remember him opening up the envelope and just like Dave chuckle, just like the room shook. And he said, the water that we have on the farm is chemically identical to the water they're using in Bardstown, Kentucky. And if you ever go on a tour in Kentucky, they mention water a couple times.
Yeah.
So what that forced us to do was, instead of digging that new well and potentially, tap into a different type of water, and essentially pump and dump, like most distilleries do, it forced us to build a system that reclaims, recycles, and recirculates virtually every drop of water. So, and so what that did was, water usage plummeted, electric usage spiked, and so the solar power offsets that electric usage that went up. And so roughly, if we're on a 2-shift distillation day, we'd use between 8,000 and 10,000 gallons a day If we had a normal system, with our current system, we're using less than 1,200, and close to 900 of that are product water. That's unsavable. We drink that eventually. So it's a highly sustainable system we put in place here, and it generally reflects the way that we do all the things on the farm.
That's incredible. Love to hear that. We only get one earth, right? I got to make sure that we use it efficiently. What about the barrels? I know there's been a wood shortage. Is that still something that's being passed throughout the distillers? Or
funny enough, of all the things that we have dealt with in the last 5 years, barrels are the one thing that went up and subsequently came down a little bit in price for us. Personally, or Whiskey Acres, we have never had a barrel shortage directly impact us. So just for the general consumer here, to kind of explain why there was a barrel shortage. Think back to 2008 when the housing market crashed. That essentially limited the demand for sawmills and their need to continue to cut and process white oak. So that basically the same wood that's used for framing houses is the same wood that's used for making bourbon barrels. And so all those sawmills got mothballed. Concurrently, all these distilleries start coming on board. Well, if you take, all the distilleries and all the craft distillers in the world and bring them online, they still don't even begin to sniff at the amount of wood demand that there was, or that went away from the housing market crash. So we got into the business. We needed to buy our first barrels in 2014. Again, I'll mention Dave Pickerel. We used him to leverage a relationship that he had in the industry, and we personally were able to have a consistent supply of barrels. Actually, our barrel supplier today is Kelvin Cooperage. They're out of Louisville, Kentucky. Shout out to the folks at Kelvin. Joe, if you're ever that direction or would like a tour there, let me know. I'll connect you. It's one of the coolest places you can go. And one of the differentiators of Kelvin, it's family owned, it's all handmade, but their fire is fueled by scrap wood, whereas most of the other other cooperages are using gas to fire those flames. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but the analogy I like to make, it's the difference between cooking with a gas grill versus a charcoal grill. And personally, I will always default to the charcoal grill as my preference over gas. And so that's kind of the story on our barrels. A little addendum to that, we have somewhere between 6 and 10 barrels that were custom made for us from oak that came from the Morton Arboretum over in Lisle, Illinois. So I'm not sure if you ever made it that direction or not, but it's this awesome little tree oasis in the middle of the suburbs. We have a great relationship with them, and they reached out and want to know whether we wanted to make some whiskey out of their wood. We found a cooper, basically a guy who had a side hustle of making barrels in Illinois, and got the wood to him. Actually aged, I should say, seasoned for nearly 2 years, and I think they're going on about 5 years of in barrel now. And so everything in the barrel, including the barrel, was grown in Illinois.
Love it. Man, these are great stories. And again, I grew up in DuPage County, very familiar with Arboretum, and walked it many a fall as the leaves have changed color. And I have to get that one for sure. What's one misconception people have about craft distilling?
I don't know if I can pin this directly on craft distilling, but the single most incorrect or question that I get or comment that I get that leads to what they want to be an incorrect answer is that you cannot make bourbon anywhere besides Kentucky. And so, in 1963 or 4, Senate concurrent resolution 19 declared bourbon to be the official spirit of the United States. Kentucky just happened to follow the rules a little bit more liberally when it came to prohibition and coming out of prohibition. And so a few more established distilleries there to carry that flag of bourbon. But that's, I don't want to say I fantasize on it, but if our distillery had a Kentucky zip code, I think we would be driving Rolls Royces today. And not that I'm after that, but that's one of the single biggest challenges, just the perception of what do these guys in Illinois think they're doing? And, and that's a fair assessment that I feel like we've gotten a few times. But a couple of my responses are, number one, Peoria was the distillation capital of the world pre-prohibition because they had water, transportation, grain, and access to wood. We have all of those things here as well. And then, as it relates to what a Kentucky distiller would do, they would buy high quality equipment from a place called Vendome Copper and Brass Works, which is what we did. They would work with a master distiller who knew what he was doing. We did that by working with a guy named Dave Pickerel. They would source the highest quality barrels possible, which we do and they do from Calvin Cooperage. And in many cases, they'd buy their high quality grain from farmers in Illinois. And so we just kind of cut out the middleman there and grow it ourselves. So all the things you need to have, good product that they have in Kentucky, including the water we have on site and have invested in the distillery. The thing that historically we didn't have was time and experience under our belt. And we're there now. There's nothing that goes into the bottle that has a caveat or an excuse anymore. We've got an incredible team, with pallets and process that I think are the envy of many other distilling teams.
Nice. And kudos on a journey well-traveled and long overdue. We talk a lot with artists and with growers about some of the things that you're discussed in terms of challenges, right? If we were in Louisville, if we were bigger, if we had different understanding about the brand. Can you talk about the business side of things? And, you've got a team that evolved from, a farming background into distilling. You're 15 years in. What have some of the challenges been in carving out a niche for yourself in this industry?
Well, carving out the niche hasn't been a challenge because that was kind of from the beginning, carving out the niche was our plan. And by being an estate distillery, that was a different message than what most places were doing. I would say among the many challenges, you deal with in a startup are understanding what's important every day. So we started with 3 co-founders, where one of the 3 of us were doing, all the distilling and the barreling and eventually the bottling. One of us was always on duty to run, give tours or help in the tasting room. And, fast forward that to today, between the distillery and the farm, I think we have about 45 employees. And so a lot of them are part-time, most of them are part-time, but what we have to do on a daily basis today is very different than what we had to do on a daily basis, in 2013, 14, 15, when we were getting going. So, there's no manual for opening a craft distillery. And so we certainly had to learn and have a steep learning curve. Patience is one of the big things. My middle name, I should have a tattoo on me, be patient, Nick, because, personally, I invested and borrowed, my kids' future on the distillery. And so, it's a challenge to look and go, hey, we've got these barrels that we could sell today that are good. And I'd love to have that cash flow through the business and back to me. But if we wait another year or two, these good barrels today will be great barrels then. And that will, further put momentum behind the business and the brand. And so, having patience has certainly been one of the bigger challenges. And honestly, just, I won't call this a challenge. I'll call this an opportunity. Is we've chosen to surround ourselves with people who know things that we don't. I'll give a couple shout outs to one is our master distiller, Rob Wallace. He's been with us for 10 years, maybe a little more than that. He came to us with 0 distillation experience whatsoever. I'd guess he probably had his first sip of scotch when he was about 8 or 9. So he's got this long, tenure of palate. He's got a great work ethic, an inquisitive mind, and the ability to troubleshoot, and a willingness to run a mop. Anybody here who thinks they're going to be a distiller, like, will you use a mop, is like the top 1 and 2 things on your job description. When Rob came to us, he and I spent 6-8 weeks together, essentially transferring the knowledge of what we built with Dave Pickrell on our standard operating procedures. And, after that amount of time, I passed the keys to Rob and said, "You make whiskey, I'm going to go try to sell it." And he immediately began asking challenge questions of, why are you doing this instead of that? And we didn't take them personally. And many of the times it was, well, this is what Dave told us to do. And so we'd reach out to Dave, why are we doing this instead of that? And quite frankly, some of the answers were, because this is what you guys were capable of doing when you were starting from scratch. He taught us the bachelor's level coursework of distilling. And Rob was looking at it from a much, a different perspective. And to Rob's credit, Rob actually enrolled himself at Heriot-Watt University out of Edinburgh, Scotland, and eventually got his master's degree in distillation and fermentation sciences, and wrote his master's thesis on how varietals of corn affect the flavor of bourbon. And so, we truly have a master distiller in experience and education. And when it comes to the production side of things, we don't tell them what to do, we ask them what to do. And I think that's a wonderful position to be in. Another person on our team is Pat Brophy. He's been with us for about 1.5 years. He spent his previous 15 plus years in his career working for the biggest spirits retailer in the state of Illinois, and he ran their single barrel program. So probably has tasted more barrels of whiskey than any other human on the planet. And so we rely on him and Rob to really work on the blends and validate what we're doing, and say, hey, this isn't ready, or we need to do this or that. So we're just blessed to be surrounded by people who are smarter than us. And so I know that's a long and maybe not direct answer to your question, but we take those challenges that you spoke of and make them solutions to make the business better.
Yeah, no, 100%. You're answering questions in droves here. So this is really good. Moving on to the consumer side of things, what's your favorite part of hosting people at the distillery?
So you need to come out for one of our releases. So we are blessed that when we do a limited release, we open the doors at 4:30 on Friday. And actually just this most recent Friday, we released a bottle that was the America 250 bottle, celebration of our 250 years. And so I'll give you the quick commercial on this. We did 1,776 bottles, each hand numbered 1 through 1776. And it was a combination of included red corn from Bloody Butcher corn, white bourbon corn from this corn called Cox Prolific, and blue from Shaman Blue Popcorn. And just a quick aside, the white corn, the Cox Prolific, that seed we sourced directly from Monticello Estate, and it's a direct descendant of corn that was grown by Thomas Jefferson back then. Wow. So really cool. It would have been really easy to just make a pretty bottle, and we did. I wish I had one on me to show you, but we said that we won't just make a pretty bottle. We're going to put something relevant in the bottle, and the consumers fed into that. We had 300 people in line when we opened, and we opened at 4:30. I think the first folks showed up sometime between 12:30 and 1. And my job is on those days is to entertain the crowd. And so I've got this little wagon that I fill with whiskey samples, and I just walk up and down the sidewalk, pouring and talking, and that's the absolute highlight of my day, or as it relates to this. There's nothing more fun than that.
Yeah, to be surrounded by people who love the craft, appreciate the story, want to be connected further to it. That's actually a good segue into the next question. If somebody wants to better understand whiskey outside of standing in line for one of your next releases, where should they start?
Well, I would highly recommend, you know, you don't have to come for a release, but if you want to come for a visit, we are open to the public for tours, 6 o'clock on Friday, 2, 4, and 6 o'clock on Saturday, and 2 o'clock on Sunday. We have this great and entertaining staff. If you started working for us, Joe, your first day of work is spending the day shadowing our distiller, Rob. Because when you give a tour, we want you talking about things you've done, not talking about things that we told you to talk about. And I think that transcends into the consumer experience. We have, we're open 15 hours a week, and we average 30,000 visitors a year. Compare that to Jim Beam, and their facility gets a little over 100,000 a year. So we have a lot of fun with guests there. If folks really want to dig into it, Trish, she's our director of consumer experience, is an executive bourbon steward, and about once a quarter she's doing deep dive classes to really dig into the nuances of bourbon and the verbiage and the technicalities and the tasting and all that kind of thing. So if you want to go from, you know, beyond the 45-minute tour and tasting with some corny jokes and you know, potentially annoying tour guides to a deep dive into all things bourbon, check our website or Facebook page for a bourbon steward class. And then, you know, if you don't want to or can't be involved with us, there's some great books out there. You know, Fred Minnick has a couple great books. I can't remember the name of the author. His first name is Adam, but he wrote a book called Proof. That's this wonderful sort of fact-based overview of kind of all things alcohol. Joe, if you haven't read that, I highly recommend it. It can be a little dry at times, but also laugh out loud funny and just like 100% relatable if you are a spirits or alcohol nerd or wannabe nerd. And then just go visit. You know, the Bourbon Trail is a ton of fun, but there's enough craft distilleries in the United States now. Go visit one that's down the road from you. In many cases, you're not going to have to travel very far, and those local distilleries are going to appreciate your dollar more than those big ones will.
100%. You won't have to book it 3 months in advance. So
right.
Definitely good advice. What music is usually playing around the distillery during harvest or production season?
It all depends on who's running the still. So I often laugh that my playlists include Yanni, Garth Brooks, Metallica, and Taylor Swift. There's, you know, I have no real like genre allegiance to it. If Rob's running the still, he wants it quiet. If Eric's running the still, it's going to be some loud, hard, heavy metal. And you know, so every day is different, I guess.
Love it. As long as it gets your foot tapping, that's the only metric.
Right. That's right.
All right. Well, we're coming to the end of our interview, Nick, and I couldn't appreciate you guys spending some time with us. Before we leave, let our followers know where they can find you and what people should be watching for.
So whiskeyacres.com. We're Whiskey Acres on Instagram. We're Whiskey Acres on Facebook. We have a beautiful visitor center in DeKalb that we'd love to host you at sometime. Upcoming releases. I think next Friday, June 5th, we've got a cigar blend that is this beautiful blend of bourbon finished in various finishing casks. I don't know the date, but sometime over late summer, early fall, we will have a 4-grain bourbon as well. And so that's something we've been working on for 6 or 7 years. We have our annual blue popcorn release in the first Friday of every December. If you go to whiskeyacres.com/contact, sign up for our newsletter, and I'm the guy who writes them, and they don't get written often enough. So I can assure you that you won't get spammed. But in there, I put those release dates so you can mark your calendar to get them. So those sort of limited time offerings are a ton of fun and really kind of what's driving our growth in business right now, because we really saw the need to carve out, use the word niche, to carve out a niche in the whiskey world. And we've done that. And those products are really coming online.
Love it. Well,
I have, if we have 2 minutes, I have a fun story that I want to tell you.
sure.
So, as a kid, on my dad's farm, and just in case I didn't make it clear, like my dad and I farm, but it's a different operation than the distillery. And as a kid, I always remember there being this copper thing hanging from the spot in the machine shed right above the bush hog. And what I found out was that was my great grandfather's still that he brought from Peoria, Illinois, when he moved from Peoria to start developing farmland in what I call my hometown now. But somewhere in the late 90s, a friend from town was out there and saw it and asked my dad whether he could have it. And my dad's like, this thing has been here for 25 years. I've never used it. I'm never going to use it. Get it the hell out of here. Take it. Having no forethought that Junior here was going to be doing what he's doing right now. And so fast forward somewhere around 2014, I was having one of those very rare good night's sleeps. And I woke up in an absolute cold sweat going, there's a still in the family. Where is it? And so I made it back to my hometown and tracked the guy down. And he's like, oh man, I gave that to somebody who's using it in West Virginia right now. And I spent the last 11 years trying to get my hands back on that. And when I was back down there about a month ago, helping my dad with spring planting, I drove by and saw this guy was outside mowing his lawn. And I said, any luck getting it back? Oh yeah, I think I did get it back. And he took me and I got great grandfather's still back.
Oh, I love it.
It's like a 20-gallon, as a kid, it seemed gigantic, but now it's we often joke about, we've been farming for decades and, we took a long gap in distilling from, our ancestors, but it's so fun for me to have a piece of that back right now.
Oh, and really, absolutely. Yeah. And is that on display or in your private collection or?
It will be on display. It is well hidden underneath a tarp right now.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you for the education and the stories connecting the grain to the glass and Whiskey Acres, 15 years in business. We wish you continued success. I tell everybody we're stuck at the hip now. I'm like a bad cold. You won't be able to get rid of me. If there's ever anything I can do to help you out, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll definitely be reaching out for some of the recommendations you made, the book and the cooperage. And I couldn't appreciate you spending time with us more. I'm going to take you out into the green room, close out the show, and then you and I can cut it up for another couple minutes.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Cheers. Joe. All right. Thanks, Whiskey Nick from Whiskey Acres. In our season 7 interview, we are going strong again. Our mission to give away 100,000 seed kits in the next 10 years, hashtag 100K in 10 years. You can find us at Beats Beds Browns on your social media of choice. If you're looking for hip hop musicians and artistry, if you're looking for homestead to commercial ag, and if you're looking for craft distillery, you found your spot. We're Beats Beds and Browns, and I wish you happy planting.